For some motivation on Wake Up Nigeria this morning, we have speaker and transformational coach Bright UK joining us to discuss leadership is not messiahship. Note that. Well, the importance of self-care being the focus, of course. Now, Bright is known for inspiring mental transformation through his Sixth Sense framework program, and it's such a pleasure to have you in the studio with us this morning.
Thank you, thank you.
All right, so leadership is not messiahship.
At all.
The importance of self-care.
Yeah.
That is as simple as it sounds, is quite broad.
Yeah, it is.
But let's talk about leadership itself, okay? Then we talk about messiahship, and then we'll talk about how one doesn't mean the other.
Okay.
So let's start with leadership.
So basically, I define leadership as becoming who you are made to be. In other words, growing into your best self, your best expression, so that you can inspire and influence others to become their best self, the best version of themselves, right? So doing that means that by the time you get into inspire and influence them, you're going to also have to help them to get there, which means you have to serve them. You have to add value to them.
Absolutely.
Right? So that's basically what leadership is. Leadership means you are inspiring them. Okay, you are activating the potentials in them. They're saying, okay, I want to become like you. I want to be like you. And so you're telling them, okay, this is the way to go about it. And you serve them one way or the other. You're adding value to them until you're able to take them from where they are to where they ought to be. That's what leadership basically is about.
Messiahship, then?
Messiahship. Messiahship is dying for others. Literally living your life and dying for others. I mean that's what Jesus did. Jesus Christ lived. He died for us, right? But if you think as a leader, you have to be a Messiah, then prepare for a premature death. You know, without even fulfilling, you might not fulfill purpose.
In
like
what
Jesus
ways will you say a leader is acting like a Messiah? Because, you know, it's actually a very thin line. There are some leaders who go out of their way to make sure everything works well.
Yes.
But then there are those that fit into that messiahship. How can you as a leader know that you have crossed that line and you're now acting like a Messiah, like a savior? Okay,
so generally, why people misconstrue both is because leadership involves sacrifice, right? And there is really no way you can demonstrate love without sacrifice. The real problem is when we do not put a boundary on the sacrifice that we are actually making, you know, in order to achieve the purpose for what we want. Actually, where to draw the line is to know exactly what you want, right? You should have strategic objectives that you are pursuing. Your sacrifice should enable the achievement of your objectives, right? The moment it begins to inhibit that, then there is a problem, all right? Because parents sacrifice for their children, workers sacrifice for their bosses and companies, pastors sacrifice for their members, you know, firstborns sacrifice for their siblings, and on and on. The examples are replete everywhere, right? But the problem is this: when they're sacrificing, there are usually some rationalizations that is going on, right? And those rationalizations are not necessarily, they are not necessarily resolved. And this is what I mean. Sometimes people think if I sacrifice for someone, they would sacrifice for me. Right?
Work that way.
It doesn't often work that way. I mean, sometimes it's also the extent of the sacrifice, right? Generally, everybody, all of us as human beings, one basic law of human behavior is that we are all selfish. We all look for our own interests. So when you are sacrificing for others, people think that you are just doing your thing. All right? For them, how they get to solve their problems is their own business. Whether they use you in the process to solve their problems, then they feel they've gotten what they want. So when people think, oh, if I sacrifice for others, they will sacrifice for me, and eventually people do not, the people who they've sacrificed for do not reciprocate the energy. It's painful.
But if you do not sacrifice, you cannot know who will reciprocate the energy.
Oh, yes.
On the one hand. On the other hand, we also have to look at the fact that, just as I asked you about how you can know that you have finally crossed that line, you also have to look at the fact that as a leader, you're supposed to be a servant as well.
Yes, you ought to be a servant.
So you need to serve.
Oh, yes.
To be served.
Yes.
Literally. So even as you're serving, like, how can you know that, all right, I've gone from service and sacrifices to actually overdoing it? Because when you're talking about messiahship, I believe you mean overdoing it
Yes,
to the
yes.
point that you're not even caring about yourself,
Yes.
because that's why you're referring to the importance of self-care, I believe.
Oh, yes. So there are symptoms to these things. Number one, you begin to see that you are being stressed beyond your capacity. All right? You're feeling stress. You're feeling burnout. All right? You're not getting the reciprocity that you really would want to see to complete the cycle of love. Sometimes, maybe not every time, but sometimes, and this is usually where the wake up comes, you begin to see elements of bitterness. All right, and resentment. That's something that begins to manifest. Oh, I did this for this person. Now it's time for this person to just give me just a bit, and then before you know it, there's an ancient story in the time of the ancient kings of Israel. Let me tell you this story. There was a famine, and then a lady said to the king, "Sir, I and my colleague, we agreed that we will kill and eat my child today, and the next day we will eat her own." And, and she agreed to that, negotiation. They killed and they ate the first woman's child. The very next day, the second woman hid her own child.
Wow.
When the king heard it, he couldn't even resolve the situation. He was just,
It was
just
very
depressed,
unfortunate
right?
situation,
But
yeah.
that's really what happens. People when they do not place a boundary over what they can give, their giving capacity, they go over and beyond themselves to give what they could not afford to give.
To give in
You see,
the
people
first
don't get it.
instance.
There are certain things you cannot afford to give. The moment the request, the demand of others to begin to encroach into that, and it doesn't even matter what their requests or their demands are. What really matters is you, because it is your own responsibility to set the necessary boundaries to say, I can and I can't.
You know what, Bright? This has been a very interesting conversation. And I like the fact that you're really explained in detail
Oh, yeah.
when you need to stop, when you
Yes.
need to pull the reins and say, I'm overdoing it.
Yes.
And especially, you've also highlighted why you need to care about yourself so that you
Yeah.
do not become bitter
You don't
or
become bitter.
resentful
Oh, yes.
and all the works.
And-
Really, I could continue this conversation for the next 10 minutes. However, right now, we have to head straight to the kitchen.
yeah.
Thank you so much for your time, Bright
Very
UK.
much
Thank you
welcome.
so much. Wow. You should have known.